Respectable Professor Joseph Stiglitz, dear Council Chairman Dr. Xie, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, this morning we are honored to have the 2001 Nobel Prize winner in economics, Professor Joseph Stiglitz, as our speaker today. Professor Stiglitz is not a stranger to this university. Almost exactly 12 years ago, he actually received an honor degree from us after he receiving his Nobel Prize. And consequently, exactly in this same place, he delivered his first public lecture in Asia at our university. Today, we're very happy he come back and will deliver his lecture on the price of inequality. Professor Stiglitz has a stunning CV. Being one of the most important and influential economists in our time, he had received many honorary professorships and fellowships and over 40 honorary doctorates, one of which, actually, as I mentioned earlier, was conferred by this university in 2002. His education, research, and career have always been associated with very top universities, such as Amherst College, Yale University, MIT, Stanford, Duke, Oxford, Princeton, Cambridge, etc. In 2011, he was named by Time magazine as one of the most influential people in the world. Currently, he is a professor of economics at Columbia University. Before we inviting Professor Stiglitz to this stage, I also like to take the opportunity to thank Macau government, especially the Macau Environmental Protection Bureau and the Macau Trade Investment Promotion Bureau for their support for this lecture. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome 2001 Nobel Prize winner, Professor Joseph Stiglitz.
Thank you, Rector. Please remain on stage, and may we now invite Rector Zhao to present a souvenir to Professor Joseph Stiglitz on behalf of the university. Thank you both. Rector Zhao, please take a seat. Without further ado, let's give a big hand to Professor Joseph Stiglitz for his lecture on the price of inequality.
Okay. Great. Okay. Thanks, Mike. Oh, thanks. Okay. Thank you very much. Well, it's a real pleasure to be back here again after 12 years. This is actually my fourth visit to Macau. The first visit was in the very early 1990s when I was working on a research project with the World Bank on the East Asia Miracle. And I traveled all around the Pearl River Delta trying to see the developments that were going on. And obviously what has happened in the last almost quarter century has been really impressive. A period, of course, longer than some of you were alive, but it's still a dramatic change that has happened in a very short period of time. In much of the world, there are other dramatic changes that have gone on. One of the dramatic changes is the subject of my talk this morning, the increase in inequality in many countries around the world, including the United States and China. So what I want to do is talk about the causes, the consequences, and the remedies to this growing inequality. But first I want to begin by describing fairly briefly precisely what has been happening in this area that has become such a source of concern. And by describing what is happening, I think we can get a better view exactly of the nature of this inequality. Inequality, as I said, has been growing actually within most countries around the world. But the level of inequality differs markedly. And there are some countries, such as Brazil, in which inequality is actually decreasing. There's an important lesson that comes out of that simple observation. The economic forces that are at play are the same on both sides of the Atlantic. The underlying economic forces basically are global in nature. The outcomes, though, differ very markedly from country to country. And that tells us that it's not just economics that's driving what is going on in equality. It's not just economics. It's really about policies, and policies themselves are determined by politics. So when we come to talk about and try to understand inequality, we can't ignore the central role of policies and politics. Now, while inequality has been growing around the world, things have gotten a lot worse in the last few years, particularly in the aftermath of the recession, the crisis, global financial crisis of 2008. And this is particularly true in the developed countries. In China, things have gotten actually a little bit better. But in the developed countries, things have become actually much worse. Those at the bottom have been hurt in three different ways. They've been affected directly by unemployment. I'll give you a few numbers a little bit later on, well, let me just mention some of those unemployment numbers. In Europe, the average unemployment rate now is 12%. But in the worst countries, countries like Portugal, Spain, and Ireland, are in depression. And the unemployment rate in those countries is 25%. But even more relevant for many of you in the audience is what the unemployment rate you would face if you try to get a job. Youth unemployment in Spain is over 50%. Youth unemployment in Greece is over 60%. And it's been that way for years since the beginning of the crisis. Different countries have different patterns of living, but one of the striking changes is that more and more young people, and when I say young, all the way into their 30s, are living with their parents because they can't afford to live alone. And parents used to want to see their children more, but now they're deciding they want to see them less. So it's not a good social arrangement, and it's all caused by the lack of jobs in these countries, and with no prospects for things getting better anytime soon. Again, it's the politics and the policies, it's how we responded to the crisis that made matters worse. If we turn to the United States, we see how bad things are because we actually have better statistics than some of the other countries. In the United States, 95% of the increase in income since the so-called end of the recession, America is supposed to be doing well, but 95% of the increase in income went to the upper 1%. That meant the bottom 99% have not seen a recovery. So when the administration and the Fed says the recession is over, they just laugh. And they say, you're talking to somebody else. Equally dramatic are data on what's happening to income and wealth in the middle. Median income means half above, half below. Median wealth is half above, half below. Median wealth fell by 40% back to the level of the early 90s. Poverty is up. And the most dramatic statistics relate to the median income for Americans as a whole It's back to 1989, back to a quarter century ago. But for a full-time male worker, it's much worse. Various demographic groups are affected differently, and one large and important demographic group are men. And the median income of males today in America is lower than it was 40 years ago. And you should try to appreciate what that means. This is the period 40 years ago was before China began its remarkable transition to a market economy, during a period of which it increased incomes eightfold. And in that period where incomes were increasing eightfold, median income in the United States stagnated. And these graphs show you the kind of picture I'm talking about. That's blue and red curves show the top 1% income with and without capital gains. The more relevant one is with